Tonight, an attempted assassination. Slovakia's Prime Minister shot multiple times. He's in a critical condition. It's understood that Robert Fico was conscious when he was taken to hospital. The suspect in the shooting has been detained. The Defence Secretary, Shapps, tells Sky News the attack is shocking. Back here, asylum seekers tell us they now fear being detained and sent to Rwanda. Is the government's flagship deterrent policy working?
You must never lose sight of why you're there in the first place, and if you do lose sight of that, then you will fail. If you don't lose sight of it and commit to your principles and implementing them, then I think he'll succeed, and I'm sure he will.
Warning to Keir Starmer to stick to his principles from his predecessor, Gordon Brown. Exclusive polling for Sky News shows ethnic minority voters are turning away from both the main parties since the conflict in Gaza. And as King Charles's first official portrait creates a stir, we're looking at what the artist's eye can tell us about the people they paint. All that and more with former Labour MP Jackie Smith, who served as Home Secretary in Gordon Brown's government, and the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. We start the programme tonight with the shocking scenes from Slovakia, where the Prime Minister, Robert Fico, is in a life-threatening condition after being shot a number of times in what officials are calling an assassination attempt. Now, this is a fast-moving situation. We don't know who the attacker is, we don't know what his motivation was, and honestly, it's not something that anyone should be speculating about right now. But today is a reminder about the vulnerability of our politicians. By the nature of the job, they can become a target. Someone tried to kill Robert Fico as he left a government meeting in the capital. And there was one detail that jumped out to me. One person who saw the attack told the local news outlet Diary N about the moment it happened. I was just going to shake his hand, they said. Now, we want our politicians to be accessible. We want to be able to approach them, to lobby them, to shake their hand. But there are risks that come with that accessibility. Of course there are. And we've seen it as well in the UK. MPs attacked on the streets while trying to do their jobs. We all remember Jo Cox murdered after being stabbed and shot outside her constituency surgery. And David Amess too, stabbed to death while holding a surgery at a church in his Leigh-on-Sea constituency. And honestly, it never fails to shock me when I speak to MPs and they tell me about having to wear stab vests while walking around their constituencies or even having police escorts. So yes, we do want our politicians to be accessible, but today is also a reminder that that comes at a price. Here is Sky's Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins with tonight's first report.
The panicked aftermath of an assassination attempt on a European leader. This is the moment Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico was bundled into his car by his security team seconds after he was shot. The 59-year-old was airlifted to a nearby hospital and is now in a life-threatening condition. A flight to the capital, Bratislava, considered too much of a risk. Witnesses say they heard at least 4 gunshots.
There were 4 people standing next to me on my left, and we'd said hello. At that point, I heard something literally like a cannonball, like cannonballs to me. I was shocked. What's going on? And then I saw him fall. I realised that this wasn't a joke. I just saw over his head as he fell behind the bench like that.
His attacker is in police custody. The motive still unknown. Minutes later, as news reached the Parliament, proceedings were suspended.
The Prime Minister of the Slovak Republic has been shot.
I'm shocked. We're all shocked by the horrific and malicious attack on Prime Minister Roberto Fico. Something serious has happened, which we probably are not yet aware of because we cannot contain it. A physical attack on the Prime Minister is primarily an attack on a person. It's also an attack on a democracy. Any violence is unacceptable. The hateful rhetoric we witness in society leads to hateful actions. The police arrested the perpetrator. As it becomes possible, they will definitely bring more information. For the most thing, and the only important thing at the moment, is that Roberto Fico recovers as soon as possible.
European leaders have been reacting to the news.
Really shocked, of course. I mean, this is a European country, the Prime Minister being shot at, I understand, several times and in a serious condition as we speak. But thoughts go to his family, first and foremost, but also, of course, to the Slovakian nation as well. This will be very shocking all round, and we wish him a speedy recovery.
I was deeply shocked by the heinous attack against my friend, Prime Minister Robert Fico. We pray for his health and quick recovery. God bless him and his country, said the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Mr. Fico, who was re-elected at the end of last year, had travelled to the town of Hadlova, 93 miles away from the capital, for government meetings, and was seen meeting members of the public. Robert Fico is no stranger to Slovakian politics. This is his third term as Prime Minister. He's exploited his country's distrust of the NATO security alliance and campaigned on ending his country's support of Ukraine. His pro-Russian comments have been greeted with suspicion, as has his push to extend state control of the media. Tonight, he's receiving life-saving treatment. Doctors say the next few hours will be critical. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News.
I want to take you straight to the hospital where the Slovakian Prime Minister is being treated. This is a government minister speaking. Let's listen.
The effects of this act. We are still investigating the shooter. I cannot tell you. Tomorrow, the police will provide details at the press conference, but from what we know right now, this was a politically motivated attempt, and it took place very shortly after the presidential election. We will do everything in power to guarantee and protect the safety of Slovak citizens.
Ja som dnes sledoval kritický stav premiéra, ja som s ním bol aj na operačnej sále.
I follow the critical condition of the PM. I was at the operating theater as well with the Minister of Defense, and this is what I was interested in. I wanted to know how someone can deal with hate this way. And once again, please.
Odpoveďou na nenávisť.
Hate should not be the response to hate. This is an appeal to all politicians. And yes, we could say what we think, well, but we will rather keep quiet. So I want to ask society to keep calm. Let's not argue and kill each other just because we're not capable of respecting each other's opinion. And yeah, I just want to say one thing. I personally think that there are a great many people who should be looking in the mirror today and realize that because they want to seem interesting and they want to exaggerate certain problems which are not that important, and they're just trying to deal with their personal frustrations, and things have to change. And for many years, I think we were very gracious. We had a very gracious attitude towards this. It wasn't us who spoke of revenge. It weren't us who abused the system, abused the criminal system, abused our statuses to cuss at people and to use hate speech. So from this point of view, it's really time to take a good look in the mirror. We are not about to make any judgments. This was a politically motivated attempt. There are no doubt about it, and you know that very well. And I cannot come to terms with this myself. I'm not capable of discussion right now. We've overcome a lot of things, but incapability of accepting the will of some part of society, when a part of society does not like the result. This is the result today. And we can talk to your colleague about whether you like or do not like MP Luboš Blaha, but right now, the Prime Minister is fighting for his life, who has been leading this country in the best democratic tradition. And if someone does not recognize that, then what we fought for since 1989 for 30 years, well, this is where we're at now. This is where we ended up at this press conference. I cannot find words for what we are witnessing today. I don't know if we'll say that Slovakia has changed, and we don't want Slovakia like this. No one wants Slovakia like this. And no one will be held by looking for, no, stop, no. Everyone should reflect, take a good look in the mirror and think about what's truly important today in the Slovak Republic and how we get to live in this part of the world and how other people live, where Slovakia is, where Slovakia has arrived in the past 20 years. This is where we ended up. And I think we will be discussing this a lot. We'll be talking about this a lot. But I spent my whole political life with Robert Fico. I know what he's like. He's the very first person to always be faithful to his values. We've gone through all the government, single-party governments, and I don't remember a situation like this. What we've witnessed in the past week, the past month, it's truly not possible to understand that, and our role is to stop that. Madam Editor, I will buy you a mirror because apparently you do not own any mirrors.
I'm not sure if today that is horrible thought. Actually, maybe next days we will be able to react to find what happened. Now I'm just focusing on the status of Robert Fico and his health. Thank you. Look, we're just talking about the level of democracy.
We're just going to leave that there, but we'll of course bring you any more updates. We saw there the Defence Minister saying that the Prime Minister of Slovakia is in an extraordinarily serious condition. He's still undergoing surgery and is fighting for his life. He also said that the attempted assassination was politically motivated. There's no doubt about it. Well, our political correspondent, Darren McCaffrey, is here with me and was listening across to that. Darren, what jumped out?
Yeah, a few things to take away from that. First of all, this remains a very serious situation. There were suggestions earlier on that things were improving, but clearly the Defence Minister said, suggesting that he is still fighting for his life. And, you know, he's clearly quite distraught. This is someone he works alongside, I'm sure he regards as a friend. And this is a reminder that, you know, Slovakia is in shock tonight. I think what was also interesting is we got a sense of the motivation, that it was politically motivated. That's the first time we've heard that today, and we got a suggestion that we're going to find out more from the police tomorrow. We know the 71-year-old man who carried out this attack is in police custody. And third of all, I don't know if you picked up on it there, he seemed to be suggesting, or hinting at least anyway, that it is the freeball atmosphere in Slovakian politics at the moment, the approach of the media and the approach of the opposition parties that may have led, in some ways, to creating the environment in which people have got pretty head up and pretty angry. Which, by the way, that is in opposition to what lots of other politicians have been saying in Slovakia today, which is to try and calm tensions down. Because I think one of the things about where Slovakia is tonight is not just that it's in shock, they've never seen anything like this before, but also genuine concern and fear about where this might shunt the country next. So we'll await those further details, but tonight, you know, the Prime Minister of a NATO country, an EU country, is fighting for his life in hospital after an attempted assassination attack. We've not seen this in Europe for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah, as you said, it felt like the two men who were still reeling from what had happened. It really did. Darren, thank you very much indeed. Darren McCaffrey there. Just to update you, the confirmation there from the government, from the Defence Minister in Slovakia, that they believe it was a politically motivated attack on the Prime Minister. No doubt about it, they said, and that he is currently still undergoing surgery and fighting for his life. Well, back here in the UK, I spoke to the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, a little earlier. It was a couple of hours ago, just to give you the timeline for it, of course, asking him about the events today. Thank you so much for being on the programme today. Firstly, if I may get your reaction to the shooting of the Slovakian Prime Minister.
Well, really shocked, of course. I mean, this is a European country, the Prime Minister being shot at, I understand, several times and in a serious condition. As we speak, thoughts go to his family, first and foremost, but also, of course, to the Slovakian nation as well. This will be very shocking all round, and we wish him a speedy recovery.
I know it's very early days and you're probably limited in what you can say to us, but do you have any update at all on the motivations, perhaps, of the attacker or the condition of the Prime Minister at all?
None whatsoever at this stage. I am in touch with my Slovakian counterpart, the Defence Minister, but it's early days and the picture is unclear at this stage. So there's nothing I can add other than our thoughts and prayers are with him and with his family.
Do you think this is a bit of a reminder about the dangers, I guess, of being a politician, of going out, of meeting the public and effectively, you know, being on the front line?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think it's worth saying that in the United Kingdom, we fortunately live in a society where guns are not commonplace. We have sadly seen some deaths of members of Parliament, and we mourn them. But it is a very, very unusual occurrence here. And there's only, in fact, ever been a single Prime Minister assassinated in the UK in all our years. Not having guns as prevalent is a very important part of that, but also it is true to say that I think the tone of politics is very important, and making sure that arguments are done in the right way in the House of Commons on programmes like yours, but not in a manner that leads to people responding by thinking that violence is ever the answer.
Do you worry that that is happening, effectively?
In the United Kingdom, no. I mean, I think that given the conflicts in the world, both what we see in Europe and, of course, what's happened in the Middle East, indeed the very large protests that have taken place, actually, we do need to remember that those have been without loss of life, which is very important in this country. But we have to be vigilant because the risks of these things spiralling are always there. And that's one of the reasons why we think it's very important to, in many cases, deal with issues, at source. It's one of the reasons why we have a large and active military, and the largest military spending in Europe is the UK, not least because that means that we can, oftentimes around the world, stop problems from getting to us in advance of things escalating. But of course, that's not the only answer. We have great security services and great policing by and large. And, you know, our culture is not to have large numbers of guns in society, and all of those things are helpful.
I know, as you said at the beginning, there's little that you can add because it is a very early situation. It's a live situation. But when did you first find out that the shooting had happened?
Literally as everybody else did. In fact, one of the features of working in the Ministry of Defence is that we work without phones and devices most of the time for security reasons. We just can't have them on us in order to have the conversations at the level required at secret and beyond. And so I don't routinely see, for example, a Sky News alert in time to see it particularly quickly. But somebody came into my office and informed me directly. We're, of course, in touch with the government in Slovakia, and I'm in touch with my opposite number, largely at this stage sending our good wishes and, of course, offering any assistance.
OK. The other story that I really want to talk to you about today is Ukraine, because things are looking, I believe, you know, quite concerning there. Russia making advances, President Zelensky having to cancel trips abroad. How worried are you about the situation in Ukraine? And do you have any fears that because of the other conflicts that we've been seeing, you know, Ukraine's almost at risk of being forgotten?
Well, I think that's exactly what happened. I mean, not in the UK, I should say, where the British public and this government have absolutely backed Ukraine to the hilt. We've this year increased our financing to Ukraine and then added another £500 million to it, so £3 billion in military aid this year. We've done it consistently, and I literally went to Kyiv earlier in the year, and I warned that this sort of attention deficit from civilized countries was in danger of enabling a situation such as the one that we're seeing now in Kharkiv from developing. And so we actually predicted this to some extent. To answer the exact question, no, I don't think that Russia is about to enter Kharkiv. The lines are certainly being tested by Putin, but fortunately that package, particularly the one from Congress, is now just starting to come to the front line. And that does mean that over the period coming, our Ukrainian friends will be able to resist this better than before. But I really hope that this is the wake-up call that we've tried to issue now being heard, which is this is not a war in which you can afford to be fully attentive and then switch off, or maybe get distracted into a different conflict and then expect nothing to change on the ground. Our brave Ukrainian friends are fighting with everything they've got, not least a lot of British kit, against this illegal invasion. We must back them all the time, not just periodically, and that, I think, is the big lesson of what's happening currently in Kharkiv.
You talked about an attention deficit from some civilized countries. Who are you talking about?
Well, look, and clearly, I think that the United Kingdom has led the way. I mean, the Ukrainians, President Zelensky, my opposite number, who I spoke to a couple of days ago, Minister Umarov, tell me this.
But my question is, who should be doing more?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, the UK leads the way on this, and what we want to see is all countries be as consistent and persistent as the UK has in its support for Ukraine. It has never wavered. We've only ever increased what we're giving them. Clearly, the package in the United States took too long to get through Congress. I mean, it is obviously the case, and for all sorts of reasons of internal politics. But here's the key thing. It's not just in Ukraine's interest, or indeed Europe's interest, for Putin not to win. It's directly in America's interest, because their authority would be challenged if that were to happen. And by the way, it's not going to happen, but if it were, their authority, not just here in Europe and with Putin, but with any other autocrat who thinks it's okay to walk into a neighboring country. And maybe if you just stick around for long enough, draw out the war a couple of years, then the West will give up, even though it said it wouldn't. It is essential that Putin does not win and cannot win. And we're going to make sure that happens, and we're going to redouble our efforts to make sure the whole world appreciates that's the case, because this is an existential risk to the civilized world.
You talk about the UK commitment to Ukraine that you're clearly very proud of. Another country that we are also sending arms to is Israel. Can you guarantee that weapons, made or funded by Britain won't be used against civilians in Rafah?
So I just absolutely need to correct this. As the British Defence Minister, I've just sent an enormous package, actually the biggest package yet, to Ukraine of gifted kit, government to government. We don't send anything government to government to Israel at all, in military terms, nothing. Any agreements, which are tiny, by the way, are first of all have to go through a licensing process, which is probably the world's toughest. What's an agreement?
Process. You say an agreement. I genuinely, because I'll be completely honest with you. I spoke to Tom Tugendhat on the programme about this the other day, and I'm really not actually clear what the UK involvement is when it comes to weapons in Israel. I just don't understand. What is it?
So we don't send anything as a government to Israel at all, whereas to Ukraine we send a lot. So that's the first thing to correct, because I think somehow this conversation, not this one particularly, but generally protest and discussion around this makes it sound like we do send things. So apart from the government, aside from the government, let me answer your point. I explained. Yeah. The British government doesn't send anything. The defence industry is at liberty to export arms. However, in the case of Israel, there are very, very few defence pieces of equipment which are sent to Israel at all. In fact,
the bottom line, isn't it? Weapons made in Britain do go to Israel, don't they? Can you guarantee that weapons made in Britain are not going to be used in these kind of offences?
Right. So again, this is to mischaracterise. The entire arms exports to Israel was minuscule last year before
it could be tiny. It could be tiny, but I'm just asking you a straight question.
I'm trying to answer it, but actually, every time I nearly get there, you sort of cut me off. Let me just say these two things. First of all, almost nothing is exported. Secondly, everything that is exported is done so under a very, very strict licensing regime, which will mean that, for example, you're probably looking at defensive equipment, for example, is the likelihood. So we don't sell them, in any case, arms that are offensive in nature. And because of the tough licensing process in place, we couldn't do anything. We legally cannot sell anything which would go against international humanitarian law. Plus, and this is really the key point, the UK government doesn't give them or sell them anything directly when it comes to arms. So the entire debate about this has occupied a ton of airtime and actually is one of the most misled, misguided debates I've ever heard, because unlike Ukraine, we don't send them weapons.
OK, got Shapps, Defence Secretary. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? Jackie and Richard, good to have you both on the programme. We should start with Slovakia. It's shocking. It's shocking to see the footage that's come out. What was your reaction, Jackie?
Well, I think you're right. It's shocking. It's a terrible situation for Fico, for his family, for his colleagues, and we saw some of the emotion of his colleagues in the piece earlier on. But as you rightly said at the beginning, an attack on a democratically elected politician is also an attack on democracy, and how you respond to it, therefore, determines the extent to which it damages your democracy. And it's really important at a time like this that politicians are very careful about what they say, that they are aiming at bringing calm rather than stirring up issues.
And particularly for a democracy that is as young as Slovakia. And that's, you see the emotion in the defence minister there, but as Jackie says, actually calm heads prevailed rather than creating a sense of increasing angst and trying to point fingers. It's, with a young democracy, this is a really, really worrying, dangerous time, actually, for everybody.
And obviously you don't want to draw too many parallels with things that are not completely the same. But, I mean, Jackie, you've had experience, haven't you, of, having to be that calm head at times when terrible things have happened, kind of acts of national security.
Yeah, but politically motivated attacks or terrorism, the intention of them is to create dissent, to create unease, to bring, to make people be worried. And that's why you have to, as an elected politician, think about what you do to reassure and to calm and to maintain that democratic situation that, as Richard says, in a place like Slovakia is relatively new, and it's so important to protect.
And it does make you feel about safety of politicians going about, in the UK as well. It certainly made me think about that too.
Yeah, anybody who is in public life, politicians, celebrity figures, it becomes deeply anxious, but equally, as the report said, politicians want to engage with voters. It's a critical part of the process. And you can't just sort of hide behind glass screens forever, otherwise you never get that sense of engagement. So, I mean, tragically, regrettably, it is a risk that goes with the territory. It's how you minimise that and try and make that acceptable balance.
There was just one other thing that I wanted to pick up with you on after the interview with Grant Shapps. It's about Ukraine. I'll be honest, Ukraine is something that I've been thinking of quite a lot over the last few days because it feels like it's a very volatile situation over there and a very important moment of the war. Grant Shapps appeared to criticise America, I thought, in that interview, saying that they had been clearly too slow in passing legislation that would allow them to send more weapons to Ukraine. What was your response to that, Jackie?
I agree with him. I think they were too slow.
Yeah,
I think they were too
enough.
slow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he, understandably, he played up the role that the UK has had, which I also support. Probably also worth mentioning that other European countries have also, and the EU, in fact, itself, through its institutions, have provided considerable support to Ukraine. Let's not forget, Germany and Sweden actually changed the basis of their defence spending and policy in order to support Ukraine, rightly.
It's clearly had an impact, and the worry is what is really going on the ground. And I think there's a very mixed picture. I think some Western commentators and politicians are being significantly over-optimistic from some of the stuff that I'm hearing. I think it is, as you say, it's a very dangerous period, and the risks are huge. And Russia is going all out. And if the Ukrainians don't have the kit, then this could go badly wrong very quickly.
I mean, is there a worry as well with domestic politics, of course, in the US becoming more important as we gear up to the election, that US taxpayers and the politicians that want to win their vote might start thinking, blimey, we're giving an awful lot of money to Ukraine still?
Well, what was really important about the eventual decision in Congress is it seems pretty clear that almost certainly Donald Trump sort of at least allowed the Republicans, because of the influence he has over them at the moment, to enable that decision to be made. Let's hope that that is a sign that the US now are not going to be playing political games about something that is fundamental for the freedoms and the security, certainly of Europe and by extension of the US and the things that are important to us.
Because, I mean, ultimately, there's got to be an end to this. There's got to be a peace, and the sooner the better. And at some point, somehow, that's going to have to be a negotiated peace. But you do that in a much better way if you're negotiating from a position of strength, as opposed to a position of weakness if the Ukrainian forces don't have the ammunition, the kit, and in order to to protect their country.
Okay, thank you both very much indeed, Richard and Jackie. Well, the story of what's happened in Slovakia and of course in Ukraine as well is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us for that will be Kevin Maguire, the Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror, and the Whitehall Editor of the Daily Mail, Claire Ellicott. Well, let's bring you up to date, shall we, with tonight's breaking news. The Slovakian Prime Minister, Robert Fico, remains in a critical condition in hospital after being shot multiple times in an attack that is being described as politically motivated. Let's get an update, shall we, with our political correspondent, Darren McCaffrey, who is here. We found out, haven't we, in the last half hour or so, that the Slovakian government do believe this to be politically motivated. Yeah,
indeed. So just first of all, in terms of the health of the Prime Minister himself, that he is in an extraordinarily serious position, fighting for his life was how the Defence Minister described it. He's undergone surgery, but that he's to quote him, the situation is bad, that he was shot 5 times, we believe, and that's why his condition is critical. But as you rightly pointed out, we don't know the motivation, but what the Defence Minister was suggesting is that it was politically motivated. And also the Interior Minister is blaming what he brands online hate for the attack. Now, we're going to hear more from the police tomorrow about the individual who believe carried out this attack. It's a 71-year-old man who's from Slovakia. But clearly there are elements within the government who, even at this stage, are wanting to put the blame on what they call journalists, public politicians that they think are spreading hate. And this is fascinating because it builds in, Sophie, to the wider political situation here, where we've got a very divided society in Slovakia, where we've got a prime minister that is popular with a certain constituency who tend to be older, more conservative, with conservative social views, who are, frankly, a bit more pro-Russian in what is a former Soviet Union state, if you like, against a group of younger people who live in cities, who are a bit more professional, who are more pro-EU, more pro-Ukraine, who are not as happy with the nationalistic approach, but also quite concerned about what they see as a form of authoritarianism in Slovakia. And so, with the Interior Minister saying that tonight, that is in contrast to other politicians who are effectively calling for calm, because I think the concern for Slovakia is they had this awful tragedy. The question is, what next? Where potentially does this attempted assassination lead the country to?
Yeah, it's such an important question. We'll only know what happens with it in the coming days. Darren, you've interviewed Robert Fico, haven't you? A couple of times, I think. What is he like?
He is a populist politician, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. He is popular. I mean, he is the most successful politician of the country. This is a man, Sophie, who was in politics before Slovakia even existed, when it was Czechoslovakia back in the early 90s. He's in his 4th term as being Prime Minister. You don't get to that stage if people don't like you, but he's a pretty brutal politician. He doesn't mince his words. He attacks his opponents quite colourfully. And he also is someone who has taken a pretty hard stance in terms of his politics, in terms of, as I say, those social issues. He utilised, some might say weaponised, the Ukraine war last year, trying to argue that this war was not just bad for security, but was also dragging down the Slovakian economy, and it needed to come to an end. And lots of people agreed with that. Now, not that much, though, that he could win a majority. His party got 23% of the vote. So it is a sign that while he's popular, there are also a lot of people who disagree with him. And I think in the end, he's also a sign of what we're seeing politically elsewhere in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe. Viktor Orban, that we've seen, who paid tribute to him today, is not just a political ally or neighbour, he's a friend. And whether it's in Hungary or in the Czech Republic in the past or in Poland, there is this concern, not just about nationalist politics, where Brussels has become the kind of the bogeyman in the room, if you like, but also, as I say, the concern about authoritarianism, the attack on the media and the judiciary as well. As I say, a very popular politician, but a very polarising one.
Darren, thank you very much indeed. Darren McCaffrey there. Well, let's go back to domestic politics now. And pinning down the political views of ethnic minority voters can be tricky. There's less data on their voting habits, which are more often more complex than any other section of the electorate. But Sky News has obtained exclusive polling data from Ipsos that offers some insight into how the leaders of the two main parties are faring. It's not pretty reading for Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer. Our political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh has the details.
While ethnic minority voting trends are incredibly complex and sometimes hard to predict, a comprehensive set of data based on polling by Ipsos and seen exclusively by Sky News gives us some indication about how people are feeling towards the leaders of the two main parties. Let's take Rishi Sunak first, the UK's first Prime Minister of colour and the first Hindu Prime Minister. How has he been rewarded for these historic firsts? Well, in terms of approval ratings, there's no real reward from ethnic minorities. He's on a ranking of -53, which is another historic milestone. It's one of the worst any Prime Minister has had in nearly 30 years. Actually, from these figures, he's much better liked by white voters. For Labour, the stakes may be even higher because they're billed as the party of progressive politics. And the party has consistently held large leads with ethnic minority voters over the last few decades. So how does the current leader, Sir Keir Starmer, compare? Well, he's at -32 for ethnic minorities. Now, that is better than Rishi Sunak's rating, and with white voters, he's here on a -20. But his standing is the lowest level a Labour leader has recorded among ethnic minorities since 1996. In fact, it's far worse than the very worst ratings recorded by either Tony Blair, here -11, or Gordon Brown. Now, there are a range of different reasons why communities have drifted from the central parties, but Ipsos has outlined one specific thread they call the Gaza effect.
Everybody is fed up of the two main political parties.
We must vote for independent or pro-Palestine candidates.
Dear Starmer, this is for Gaza.
So this is interesting. Let's take a look at both leaders' satisfaction ratings over the last year. With white voters, they're the dotted lines. You can see there's next to no effect of the events in the Middle East for either parties, really. But the bold lines, these are the ethnic minority voters, and you can see just how different the reaction is there. Now, if we zoom in on this part, the 7th of October attacks, we can see a different story. For Rishi Sunak, there is a drop, but only around 13 points. It's far more significant, actually, for Sir Keir Starmer. He's got a large fall of about 29 points among ethnic minorities. That's huge.
I think it's very clear that Labour still retains a large lead overall amongst ethnic minority Britons, around 48 points, but they are bleeding support to smaller parties such as the Liberal Democrats, Greens and others. Now, that's not likely to be decisive in the general election overall, but it could cost the party some support in specific areas of the country, such as we saw in the local elections recently.
Now, the scale of the impact is almost impossible to predict, and the drop in these figures don't necessarily translate into votes or even seats. But what is clear is that these figures show both parties will need to offer ethnic minorities much, much more to win their vote at the next general election.
Serena Barker-Singh reporting there. Now, the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, is calling for a multi-billion-pound rescue plan to help what he calls austerity's children from a spiralling poverty crisis. He's warning that without help, the number of children living in poverty could increase to a record 4.5 million. And he's urging the Chancellor to use his autumn statement to announce measures to tackle the issue. Speaking to the former Prime Minister earlier, I began by asking just how bad the situation is. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to have you on, Mr Brown. You've said that there are obscene levels of child poverty in the UK. Just how bad is the situation?
We've got probably the highest levels of poverty in living memory amongst children. And these figures have risen dramatically over the last few years. So we've now got 4.3 million children who are officially in poverty. 3 million children will be missing meals at some point during the course of this month. 1 million children last night and tonight will be sleeping without a bed of their own. This is a level of destitution for some families that we haven't seen for many, many years. You know, I grew up in a mining and textile town. We saw a great deal of poverty when I was growing up, and we're back to these kind of levels. And it really is something that demands urgent attention. Children ill-clad and hungry, families having to choose between heating, eating and keeping clean, mothers ashamed because they're having to queue up at food banks to get food for their children to make ends meet. These are all the things that are now happening that should not be happening. As the Trussell Trust has reported today, saying that they have had to give out 3 million food parcels in the last year, it should not be happening in 2024.
You know, you're someone who's very instilled in your community, in Fife, and it does really hit me, when you say that you're seeing poverty now that you didn't see or you only saw many years before. What kind of things are you witnessing then now?
Well, we're running a multi-bank, which is a food bank, clothes bank, furnishings bank, toiletries bank, baby bank, all rolled into one. And so last winter, people were desperate for bedding just to keep warm. They'd stopped heating their homes and they were simply trying to heat themselves. As we move into these summer months, toiletries, people cannot afford or consider soap and shampoo and toothpaste as a luxury item. And that's why the biggest hospital admissions for children under 10, between 5 and 9, is for dental decay. And that's 3.5 times higher in the poorer communities than in the richer communities. So we're seeing austerity's children. These are the children born in the last 15 years, children who are growing up poor, who've probably never known what it is to be anything other than poor, and they don't have the clothes, they don't have the shelter that is of high quality, and they don't get the nutrition that they need. And we have to do something about it. It is the biggest social problem we face. It is dividing our society, and it's going to get worse because the government has, in the last few weeks, given up on all the emergency help it was giving for heating. It's going to abolish the household support fund, which is the last line of defence against destitution. And we have charities now advertising for help because they anticipate summer hunger for children who are out of school without school meals and nothing in the lunchtime break. These are the kind of problems we're dealing with, and these are the problems that I do think any government minister, if they came around the country, if they actually visited communities, and we're talking about Wales, Scotland, the North East, the North West, the Midlands, and many parts of London and the South, they would see that these are real problems facing families who just cannot make ends meet. And most of them are people who are in jobs. 70% of children in poverty are in families where someone is working. So it's a problem of low pay as well as a problem of poor benefits.
You speak, very movingly of these children who don't have a bed, who don't even have toothpaste, things that you and I would just take completely for granted. What specifically are you calling for? What needs to happen?
Well, I'm talking about the September financial statement that I believe Jeremy Hunt is going to make, and it's only really a few weeks until then. And I'm suggesting, first of all, that the banks in Europe, the Swiss Bank and the European Central Bank, they require the commercial banks to hold assets at their banks and don't pay interest on them. We pay interest. That's not necessary for a fraction of the reserves that are held at the central bank. That could raise between 1 and 2 billion. The Household Support Fund, which is £500 million, should be continued, not abolished, and many charities are calling for that. At the same time, I do think that a children's fund should be created, and it could be with foundations and charities as well as businesses and local and national government. But we need to revive projects like Sure Start, because we proved that until 2010, Sure Start was actually increasing educational performance, reducing demand for healthcare, was actually paying for itself, and was actually cost effective. So all the things I'm proposing can be achieved within the fiscal rules that both political parties have set down.
Of course, there's been a lot of scrutiny about the two-child limit. So that, many people believe, many studies suggest, has forced larger families into poverty, so children into poverty. I mean, even Suella Braverman has come out to say that she thinks that two-child limit should be scrapped. Keir Starmer hasn't. Is he, now to the right of Suella Braverman?
What I think is needed is a root and branch review, because it's not just the two-child rule, it's the bedroom tax, it's also the benefit caps, it's the housing benefit limit.
You think that Keir Starmer should commit to scrapping the two-child limit?
I think, yes, I think they should do a review, a root and branch review of universal credit, and you've got to look at every aspect of universal credit which has gone wrong. And it's not, of course, just the two-child rule that is causing problems. It's the caps that have been placed on, for example, housing benefit. And it's the deductions that are taking place. If you go onto universal credit, you don't get any benefit for 5 weeks. Therefore, you've got to take out a loan. Therefore, half the people on universal credit are now paying back loans that they took out because they didn't have any benefit under the system's rules. And that means the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions, it's now the biggest debt collector in the country. And some people are having 25% of their benefit cut every week, some people 30% actually, and that means they're forced further and further into poverty. So all these rules have got to be looked at. And let's just remember that the majority of families we're talking about are people in work. This is not the work-shy or the indolent that are featured in the article today by the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. They've got to focus on where the majority of the child poor are, and they're in working families. On the two-child rule, for example, 60% of the people who are hit by the two-child rule are working families. They're not families where someone is not working at all. They're families where people just cannot make ends meet. Now, if you're on the two-child rule, you're probably losing about £60 a week, but it's affecting every child in the household, not just the third or fourth child. It's affecting the first and second child as well, and it's reducing people to a level of poverty that we should not see. And I tell you, this is getting worse this year because of the changes that have been made by withdrawing emergency help and the prospective decline or collapse of the Household Support Fund.
Can I just ask you about Rwanda? Because today Sky access to asylum seekers in the United Kingdom, who are saying if they'd known about the Rwanda scheme, they wouldn't have come, which suggests it could perhaps be working as a deterrent. If there is evidence that Rwanda acts as a deterrent, do you think there's an argument to keep it?
Sophie, I'm not going to be a backseat driver for the policy of either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party at the moment. I'm focused on child poverty, and I'm focused on what needs to be done urgently to deal with it. So if you'll forgive me, I'll leave the questions about Rwanda and about asylum seekers to those who are dealing with them in the House of Commons at the moment. I'm out of Westminster politics. I want to talk about what's happening here and now. I am shocked and ashamed by the amount of poverty I'm seeing in this country, and that's what I'm going to focus my energies on, both in the charitable work that I'm hoping lots of businesses and other people can join in, but also in trying to alert the political system that you cannot ignore the future of millions of children in our country without terrible consequences for the future. Thatcher's children, we talked about educational underachievement in the mining areas when there was the collapse of the pits and people saw their aspirations crushed. We're seeing the same thing again. These are austerity's children. That's what I'm going to talk about.
I think a lot of people would probably, respect you for doing that and for sticking to your guns when it comes to talking about child poverty. Yeah. I am going to slip in one very cheeky question at the end, if I may, but you can dodge this one, don't worry, because we may be having the first Labour Prime Minister since yourself. And I know I'm going to ask this question very carefully because I know you don't want to be a backseat driver. But what would be your advice to any, incoming Prime Minister? It could be, policy. It could be about nicking the number 11 flat because it's bigger. What would your bit of advice be?
Well, to stick to his principles. And Keir Starmer, I know, as a very talented but also very principled person. And I do think that the pressures of politics are such that you have to deal with problems every day that you never anticipated, but you must never lose sight of why you're there in the first place. And if you do lose sight of that, then you will fail. If you don't lose sight of it and commit to your principles and implementing them, then I think he'll succeed, and I'm sure he will.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Gordon Brown. Thank you. Gordon Brown on the Politics Hub. They're still to come on the programme this evening. A picture tells 1,000 words. As the new portrait is unveiled of King Charles, we'll ask what our leaders are trying to tell us with their official portraits.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the government triggers an emergency measure to deal with overcrowding in prisons. But will it help a system that is bursting at the seams? Plus, residents in a town in Devon are told to start boiling their tap water over a risk of parasitic disease. We'll be live in Brixham. All that and much more to come on the UK Tonight at 8.
Well, at risk of sounding mealy-mouthed, good and bad, I think the face has got a real sense of character to it. He looks sort of benign, slightly apprehensive. It looks like him. It looks like a living image, which is important. It's a very important part of a photographer to catch this sense of someone living through the sitting, living through time. But at the same time, he's vanishing away into all that red. It's a sort of fiery furnace all around him. I'm not quite sure why. I believe it's supposed to echo the uniform of the Welsh Guards, which he's wearing, which is red. But it subsumes him. And if you think about the great portraits of the past, you think of Van Dyck and Charles on his horse, his predecessor, Charles, on his great horse thrusting, or Holbein's very famous Henry VIII, this huge figure presenting himself to the world. And instead we have this king who's almost vanishing, he's dissolving. But it feels very randomly modern to me. I see no reason to have this great cloud of red around him. I think I prefer a painting, which is, this is a portrait. It's his first portrait as monarch. It would be a good portrait if he was set in a symbolic stage set, I think. And instead we have this, well, as I say, a vanishing figure. I would still argue, but why? Why have this great sea of red?
I'd argue why not. I really like it.
Do you? It depends. It's a matter of taste, but I mean, it's hard to judge, but it is an enormous painting. That's another thing. And apparently he had to stand on a box to paint it, and the king stood on a box that they
Yes,
could be
8'6" by 6'6" apparently. So that's a whole lot of king and a whole lot of red.
It is a huge sea of red, and it also depends a lot where it's going to hang. I mean, it doesn't look too bad behind the gold setting where it's hung now. It just seems to me a random choice to have this sea of red. But I mean, maybe a random choice you like, a random choice I don't happen to like.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our planet. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington, D.C.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, it's often said that a picture paints 1,000 words, and now, with the first official portrait of the King unveiled since his coronation, there's been a lot of chatter about what it tells us about Charles. Hopefully we can have a look. There it is, the picture. It was done by the artist Jonathan Yeo. I love it, I have to say. I know that it probably divides opinion, but it did also get us thinking about how our politicians have been painted. This portrait was unveiled last year of Theresa May. It hangs in the Parliamentary Art Collection. She looks quite stern, doesn't she? I have to say, on that one. And how about this one? A portrait of Tony Blair, painted by the artist Phil Hale. This was towards the end of his time in Downing Street. Apparently, he always pointedly refused to sit for artists while in office. Tony Blair, painted there. Right, let's chat to Jackie and Richard, shall we? What do you think of the paintings then, or the pictures?
I think that the King's picture of his face is great, but the rest of it, frankly, I think it just sort of disappears into a bit of an amorphous mass. I quite like the comment in the Times that said you get a knighthood for the face, you get an MBE for the hands, and for the rest of it, frankly, off to the tower with you.
It's better than the Theresa May one, though, isn't it? That's the one I thought was a bit... I'm not sure about the Theresa May one, I'll be honest.
No, I love that.
Do you?
Yeah. No, I think the Theresa May one tells you something really important about her. That's what I think. I mean, I think...
What do you think it tells us about Theresa May?
I think it tells you... It sort of shows you her sternness, her...
Yes, you're right. Maybe you're right, actually.
Seriousness. Yeah. No,
you've converted me, Jackie. I wasn't sure about it.
But that doesn't mean you have to like it. I'm not a fan of it.
But this is the point about political or sort of ceremonial portraits. They're not supposed to be, are they? Oh, I look really good in that picture.
Yeah, I know.
They're supposed to sort of represent something more than that.
Yeah, exactly. That's true, isn't it? It's like the picture that you always
Actually,
yourself.
I thought the Tony Blair one was very interesting because it was, particularly as it was towards the end of his career, it was very reflective, very thoughtful.
It's a brilliant portrait.
And you could sort of say, OK, so how's it gone?
I
think there's
it captures something.
I think it does capture something, actually, in his, just in the thought, the reflections going on there. I think that's the cleverest of the three.
Have either of you sat for a portrait?
I have.
Have you? Have you, Jackie? How was it? Was it good?
Yeah, it was great. It hangs in the hall of my former Oxford College, and I'm very proud of it. And I take trail friends up there and say, look at my portrait.
Lucky them.
Love
no,
it.
Not...
Yeah, lots of time still. That's it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Mee. I'll see you tomorrow at 7.